All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to be reading today, so that's why I put this under just chatting. I'm going to be reading the Bioshock book Rapture by John Shirley. It's a great book. As you can see, it is worn. I've read it several times. So I'm going to share it with you. And today I'm going to read at least the prologue and get us going into the book. And then I'm going to continue to read, hopefully weekly at least, if not more often, until we get through the book. All right. So there's a little foreword here. I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his own brow? No, says the man in Washington. It belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican. It belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow. It belongs to everyone. I reject those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture, a city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well. And that was Andrew Ryan. And then there's a secondary one that says, imagine if you could be smarter, stronger, healthier. What if you could even have amazing powers, light fires with your mind? That's what plasmids do for a man. That's my really terrible attempt at an Irish accent. And that was Atlas. All right, into the prologue. 5th Avenue, New York City, 1945. Sullivan, chief of security, found the great man standing in front of the enormous window in his corporate office. The boss was silhouetted against city lights. The only other illumination was from a green-shaded lamp on the big glass-topped desk across the room, so that the great man was mostly in shadow, hands in the pockets of his crisply tailored suit jacket, as he gazed broodingly out at the skyline. It was 8 o'clock, and Chief Sullivan, a tired middle-aged man in a rain-dampened suit, badly wanted to go home, kick off his shoes, and listen to the fight on the radio. But the great man often worked late, and he'd been waiting for these two reports. One report, in particular, Sullivan wanted to have done with, the one from Japan. It was a report that made him want a stiff drink, and fast. But he knew the great man wouldn't offer him one. The great man was how Sullivan thought of his boss, one of the richest, most powerful men in the world. The term was both sarcastic and serious, and Sullivan kept it to himself. The great man was vain and quick to sense the slightest disrespect. Yet sometimes it seemed the tycoon was casting about for a friend he could take to heart. Sullivan was not that man. People rarely liked him much, something about ex-cops. Well, Sullivan, said the great man asked, not turning from the window, do you have them? I have them both, sir. Let's have the report on the strikes first. Get out of the way, the other one. Get it out of the way. The other one, he shook his head, that'll be like hiding from a hurricane in a cellar. We'll have to dig the cellar first, so to speak. Sullivan wondered what he meant by the cellar remark, but he let it go. The strikes, they're still going on at Kentucky mines and the Mississippi refinery. The great man grimaced. His shoulders, angularly padded in the current style, slumped ever so slightly. We've got to be tougher about this, Sullivan, for the country's good, as well as our own. Sir, I have sent in strikebreakers. I have sent Pinkerton men to get names on the strike leaders. See if we can get something on them, but these people are persistent, a hard-nosed bunch. Have you been out there in person? Did you go to Kentucky or Mississippi, Chief? You need not await permission from me to take personal action, not on this. Unions, they had their own little army in Russia. They called them workers' militias. Do you know who these strikers are? They are agents of the Reds, Sullivan, Soviet agents. And what is that they demand? Why, better wages and work conditions. What is that but socialism, leeches? I have no need of unions. I made my own way. Sullivan knew that the great man had the benefit of luck. He'd struck oil as a young man, but it was true he'd invested brilliantly. I'll see to them myself, sir. The great man reached out and touched the glass wall, remembering. I came here from Russia as a boy. The Bolsheviks had just taken the place over. We barely got out alive. I won't see that sickness spread. No, sir. And the other report. It's true, isn't it? Both cities are almost entirely destroyed. One bomb apiece. The great man shook his head in wonder. Just one bomb for a whole city. Sullivan stepped closer, opened one of the envelopes, handed over the photographs. The great man held the glossy photographs to the window so he could make them out in the twinkling light of the skyline. They were fairly sharp black and white snaps of the devastation at Hiroshima, mostly seen from the air. The city lights were caught on their glossy surface, as if somehow the thrusting boldness of the New York skyline had itself destroyed Hiroshima. That's an interesting concept. Our man in the State Department smuggled this out for us, Sullivan went on. Some in the target cities were atomized, blown to bits. Hundreds of thousands dead or dying in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A great many more dying from, he read aloud from one of the reports he brought, flash burns, radiation burns, and trauma. It is expected that an equal amount will be dead of radiation sickness and possibly cancer in another 12 months or so. Cancer? Caused by this weapon? Yes, sir. It's not yet confirmed, but based on past experiments, they say it's likely. I see. Are we indeed certain the Soviets are developing such weapons? They're working on it. The great man snorted ruefully. Two gigantic empires. Two great octopi struggling with one another and equipped with monstrous weapons. Just one bomb to destroy an entire city. Those bombs will only get bigger and more powerful. What do you suppose will happen in time, Sullivan? Atomic war is what some are saying. I feel certain of it. They'll destroy us all. Still, there is another possibility. For some of us. Yes, sir? Despite what this civilization is becoming, Sullivan. First the Bolsheviks, and then Roosevelt, Truman, carrying on much of what Roosevelt began. Little men on the backs of great ones. It will only stop when real men stand up and say, "No more!" Sullivan nodded, shivering. At times the great man could convey the power of his inner conviction almost like a lightning rod transmitting a mighty burst of electricity. There was an undeniable power around him. After a moment, the great man looked curiously at Sullivan, as if wondering how much he could be trusted. At last, his employer said, "My mind is made up, Sullivan. I shall move ahead on a project I was toying with. It will no longer be a toy. It will be a glorious reality. It entails great risk, but it must be done. And you may as well know now, it will take perhaps every penny I have to make it happen." Sullivan blinked. Every penny. What extreme was his boss going to now? The great man chuckled, evidently enjoying Sullivan's astonishment. "Oh, yes. At first it was an experiment, little more than a hypothesis, a game. I already have the drawings for a smaller version, but it could be bigger, much bigger. It is the solution to a gigantic problem." "The union problem?" Sullivan asked, puzzled. "No. Well, yes, in the long run. Unions, too. But I was thinking of a more pressing problem, the potential destruction of civilization. The problem, Sullivan, is the inevitability of atomic war. That inevitability calls for a gigantic solution. I've sent out explorers and I've picked the spot, but I wasn't sure I would ever get it a go-ahead. Not until today." He peered again at the photos of the devastation, turning them to catch the light better. "Not until this. We can escape, you and I, and certain others. We can escape from the mutual destruction of the mad little men who scuttle about the halls of government power. We are going to build a new world in the one place these madmen cannot touch." "Yes, sir." Sullivan decided not to ask for an explanation. Better to just hope that whatever overblown scheme the great man was caught up in, he'd drop it. In the end, when he faced the full cost... that he'd drop it in the end when he faced the full cost. "Anything more, sir? I mean, tonight. If I'm going to break up those strikes, I'd better leave early in the morning." Yes, go and get some rest. But there'll be no rest for me tonight. I must plan." So saying, Andrew Ryan turned away from the window, crossed the room, and tossed the photos aside. The destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki skidded across the glass-top desk. Left alone in the shadowy office, Ryan slumped in the padded leather desk chair and reached for the telephone. It was time to call Simon Wales and give him the go-ahead for the next stage. But his hand hovered over the phone and then withdrew, trembling. He needed to calm himself before calling. Something he'd said to Sullivan had sparked a painful, harshly vivid memory. I came here from Russia as a boy in 1918. The Bolsheviks had just taken the place over. We barely got out alive. Andrew Ryan wasn't his name. Not then. Since coming to the USA, he'd Americanized his name. His real name was Andrei Ryanovsky. Andrei and his father are standing at the windswept train station, shivering in the cold. It is an early morning, and both of them are staring down the tracks. His father, heavily bearded, his lined face grim, is holding their single bag in his left hand. His large right hand is resting on young Andrei's shoulder. The dawn sky, the color of a deep bruise, is closed by clouds. The cutting wind is serrated by sleet. A few other travelers, huddled in long dark coats, stand in a group farther down the platform. They seem worried. Though a woman with a round red face, her head in a fur wrap, is smiling, talking softly to cheer them up. Beside the door to the train station, an old man in a tattered coat and fur hat tends a steaming samovar. Andrei wishes they could afford some of the old man's hot tea. Andrei listens to the wind hiss along the concrete platform and wonders why his father stands so far from the others, but he guesses the reason. Some from their village on the outskirts of Minsk know that father was against the communists, that he spoke up against the Reds. Now many who'd once been their friends were beginning to denounce all such betrayers of the People's Revolution. His father had word from the priest the night before that the purge was to begin today. They were first in line when the station opened. Father and Andrei purchasing a ticket to Constantinople. Father carries traveling papers, permissions to purchase Turkish rugs and other goods for import. The papers might be good enough to get them out of Russia. Father fiddles with the money in his pocket he'd brought to bribe customs officials. They will probably need it all. His father's breath steams in the air. The train steams as it approaches, a big dark shape, hulking towards them through the grayness, a single lantern above the cowcatcher projecting a rain-scratched cone into the mist. Andrei glances toward the other travelers and sees another man approaching. "Father," Andrei whispers in Russian, turning to look at a tall, lean man in a long green coat with red epaulets, a black hat, a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Is that man one of the Red Guard?" "Andrei." His father grips his shoulder, brusquely turns him so that he looks away from the soldier. "Don't look at him." Piotr, it's Piotr, I can't say it. Piotr Ryanovsky. Sorry, everyone, my horrible Russian pronouncing of that name. They turn to see his father's cousin, Dmitri, standing with his arm around his wife, Vasilisa. A stocky, pale, blonde woman in a yellow scarf, her nose red with the cold. She rubs wetness from her nose and looks at Andrei's father imploringly. "Please, Piotr." She whispers to Andrei's father, "We have no more money. If you pay the soldiers—" Dmitri licks his lips. "They are looking for us, Peter. Because I spoke at the meeting yesterday. We have train tickets, but nothing more. Not a ruble left. Perhaps a bribe will make them let us go." "Dmitri, Vasilisa, if I could help I would, but we will need every kopeck. I have to think of this boy. We have to pay our way too, our destination, a long journey." The train chugs into the station, looming up rather suddenly, reeking of coal smoke, making Andrei jump a little as the engine furiously sprays steam. "Please," Vasilisa says, wringing her hands. The militiaman is looking towards them, and another Red Guardsman, and then a third step onto the platform from the station door, all of them carrying rifles. The train is grinding slowly past. It slows, but to Andrei it seems it will never completely stop. The militiaman is calling out to cousin Dmitri, his voice a bark. "You! We wish to speak to you!" He takes his rifle off his shoulder. "Dmitri," father hisses, "keep your peace. Do not make a sound." The train is still shuddering as it finally stops, and Andre feels his father's hand clamping the back of his neck, feels himself propelled up the metal stairs onto the train. He almost falls on his face. His father clambers on after him. They bang through a door into a smoky car, the windows greasy and steam-coated. They find a seat on the wooden benches, and his father hands the scowling conductor their tickets. Andre wipes the window enough to see Dmitri and Vasilisa talking to the militiamen. Vasilisa is weeping, waving her arms. Dmitri is standing stiffly, shaking his head, pushing his wife behind him. The discussion goes on, and the armed men frown at the travel papers. Andre, father mutters, don't look. But Andre cannot look away. The tall militiaman tucks Dmitri's papers away somewhere and then gestures with his rifle. Dmitri shakes his head, waving his train tickets. The train shudders, a whistle blasts. Vasilisa tries to pull him towards the train. The soldiers wave their guns. Andre remembers Dmitri coming to the feast for his 10th birthday, smiling, bringing with him a wooden saber carved as a gift. The train whistle screams. The guard shouts. One of them jabs at Vasilisa with his rifle, knocking her to her knees. Dmitri's face goes white as he grabs at the rifle barrel. The man turns it towards him and fires. The train lurches into motion as Dmitri stumbles back. "Oh, father!" Andre cries out. "Look away, boy!" But Andre can't look away. He sees Vasilisa flailing at the soldiers, weeping, and 2 more guns fire. She spins and goes down in a heap atop Dmitri. The 2 of them lie there, dying together on the platform, as the steam from the train cloaks them, and the past cloaks them too, the train, like time, moving away. Andrew Ryan shook his head. Workers' militia, he muttered bitterly now. A revolution for the poor, to save us all for a cold death on a train platform. And that had been just the beginning. He'd seen far worse things traveling with his father. Ryan shook his head and looked at the pictures of Hiroshima. Madness. But no worse than the devastation of socialism. His dream had always been to build something that would survive anything the little madman could throw at him. If only father could be there to see it rise from the shadows, magnificent, unafraid, a fortress dedicated to freedom. Rapture. All right. That was the prologue. I hope you enjoyed it. My accents, I'm working on them. I might take a break and read the next part. That didn't really take very long. I might read the next chapter because I feel pretty good. My voice doesn't feel rough, even though it's a little scratchy. So I'm going to take a little break then, and I will be back. So I'm going to be a little intermission. Boom. All right, I'm back. And what I learned from reading that prologue is that I need to work on my Andrew Ryan voice. He talks like I can't do it. We'll get there. I can do it when I can hear him. So this is part 1, the first age of Rapture. And there's a little forward again. And so these little forward quotes are in the game. And I can hear Andrew Ryan talking in my head. The parasite hates 3 things: free markets, free will, and free men. Andrew Ryan. Chapter 1. Park Avenue, New York City, 1946. Almost a year later, Bill McDonough was riding an elevator up to the top of Andrew Ryan Arms. But he felt like he was sinking under the sea. He was toting a box of pipe fittings in one hand, toolkit in the other. He'd been sent so hastily by the maintenance manager, he didn't even have the bloody name of his customer. But his mind was on earlier doings in another building, a small office building in Lower Manhattan. He'd taken the morning off from his plumbing business to interview for an assistant engineer job. The pay would start low, but the job would take him in a more ambitious direction. They had looked at him with only the faintest interest when he walked into the Feben, Lieber, and Queef engineering firm. The 2 interviewers were a couple of snotty wankers. One of them was Feben Jr. They seemed bored by the time they called him in, and their faint flicker of interest evaporated completely when he started talking about his background. He had done his best to speak in American phraseology to suppress his accent, but he knew it slipped out. They were looking for some snappy young chap out of New York University, not a Cockney blighter who worked his way through the East London School of Engineering and Mechanical Vocation. Assholes. Bill heard them say it through the door after they dismissed him. Another limey grease monkey. All right then, so he was a grease monkey. Just a mechanic, and lately a freelance plumbing contractor. A dirty little job screwing pipes for the knobs. Heading up to some rich bloke's penthouse. There was no shame in it. But there wasn't much money in it either. Working on assignment for Chanowski's maintenance. It'd be a long time before he could save up enough to start a big contracting outfit of his own. He had a couple of lads hired on from time to time, but not the big contracting and engineering company he always envisioned. And Mary Louise had made it clear as polished glass she was not really interested in marrying a glorified plumber. I had enough of fellas that think they're the cat's meow because they can fix the turlet, she said, a pretty girl from the Bronx. Oh, I don't know, Bronx accent, what is that? And Mary Louise Fenson and raring to go, but not terribly bright after all. Probably drive him barmy anyway. The moment he'd got home, the phone rang. Bud Chanowski, barking about getting his ass to the address in Manhattan on Park Avenue. Their building maintenance was AWOL, probably drunk somewhere. And the big shot at the penthouse needed plumbers. Fast as you can drag your lazy ass over there. We got 3 bathrooms to finish installing. Get those witless wrench jockeys of yours over there too. He'd call Roy Finn and Pablo Navarro to go on ahead of him. Then he'd change out of the ill-fitting suit into the gray, grease-stained coveralls. Limey grease monkey, he murmured, buttoning up. And here he was, wishing he'd taken time for a cigarette before coming. He couldn't smoke in a posh flat like this without permission. He stepped glumly out of the elevator, into an antechamber to the penthouse, his toolbox clanking at his side. The little wood-paneled room was scarcely bigger than the elevator, an artfully paneled mahogany door with a brass knob, embossed with an eagle, was its only feature. Besides a small metal grill next to the door, he tried the knob, locked. He shrugged and knocked on the door, waiting. He started to feel a little claustrophobic. "Hello?" he called. "Plumbing contractor from Chanowski's. Hello?" Oh my God. "Don't drop your H's, you bastard," he told himself. "Hello?" A crackling sound, and a low, forceful voice emanated from the grid. "That the other plumber, is it?" He bent and spoke briskly into the grid. "It is, sir." "No need to shout into the intercom." The door clicked within itself, and to Bill's amazement, it didn't swing inward, but slid into the wall up to the knob. He saw there was a metal runner in the floor, and at the edge of the door a band of steel. It was wood on the outside, steel on the inside. Like this man was worried someone might try to fire a bullet through it. No one was visible on the other side of the open doorway. He saw another hallway, carpeted, with some rather fine old paintings, one of which might be a Dutch master, if he remembered anything from his trips to the British Museum. A Tiffany lamp stood on an inlaid table, blowing like a gem. This toff's got plenty of the ready, Bill thought. He walked down the hall, into a large plush sitting room, luxurious sofas, a big unlit fireplace, more choice paintings and fine lamps. A grand piano, its wood polished almost mirror-like, stood in the corner. On an intricately carved table was an enormous display of fresh flowers and an antique Chinese jade vase. He'd never seen these flowers like them before, and the decorations on the tables. He was staring at a lamp that appeared to be a gold sculpture of a satyr chasing an undressed young woman, when a voice spoke sharply to his right. The other two are already at work in the back. The men's bathroom through here. The main bathroom's through here. Bill turned and saw a gent in the archway to the next room already turning away from him. The man wore a gray suit, his dark hair oiled back. Must be the butler. Bill could hear the other two lads, faintly, in the back of the place, arguing about fittings. Bill went through the archway as the man in the suit answered a chiming golden ivory telephone on the table in front of the big window displaying the heroic spires of Manhattan. Opposite the window was a mural, done in the sweeping modern industrial style, of burly men building a tower that rose up out of the sea. Overseeing the workers in the mural was a slim, dark-haired man with blueprints in his hand. Bill looked for the WC, saw a hallway with the gleaming steel and white tile bathroom at its end. That's my destination, thought Bill bitterly. The crapper. A fine crapper it might be, one of the three. My destiny is to keep their water closets in working order. Then he caught himself. No self-pity now, Bill McDonough. Play the cards you dealt, the way your da taught you. Bill started towards the door to the bathroom hall, but his attention was caught by the half-whispered urgency of the man's voice as he growled at the telephone. Isley, you will not make excuses. If you cannot deal with these people, I will find someone who has the courage. I'll find someone brave enough to scare away this pack of hungry dogs. They'll not find my campfire undefended. The voice's stridency caught Bill's attention, but something else about it stirred him too. He'd heard that distinctive voice before, maybe in a newsreel? Bill paused at the door to the hall and had a quick look at the man pressing the phone to his ear. It was a man in the mural, the one holding the blueprint, a straight-backed man, maybe early 40s, medium height, too thin, crisply straight strokes of mustache matched by the dark strokes of his eyebrows, a prominent cleft chin. He even wore a suit nearly identical to the one in the painting, and that strong, intense face. It was a face Bill knew from the newspapers. He'd seen the name over the front of door of every edifice. It never occurred to him that Andrew Ryan might actually live here. The tycoon owned a significant chunk of America's coal, its second biggest railroad, and Ryan Oil. He'd always pictured a man like that whiling the days away playing golf on the country estate. Taxes are theft, Isley. What? No need. I fired her. I've got a new secretary starting today. I'm elevating someone in reception. Elaine something. No, I don't want anyone from accounting. That's the whole problem. People like that are too interested in my money. They have no discretion. Sometimes I wonder if there's anyone I can trust. Well, they'll get not a penny out of me more than absolutely necessary, and if you can't see to it, I'll find a lawyer who can. Ryan slammed the phone down, and Bill hurried on to the bathroom. Bill found the toilet in place, but not quite hooked up. An ordinary standard toilet, no gold seat on it, looked like it needed proper pipe fittings, mostly. Seemed a waste of time to send 3 men out for this, but these posh types liked everything done yesterday. He was aware as he worked that Ryan was pacing back and forth in the room outside the hall to the bathroom, occasionally muttering to himself. Bill was kneeling to one side of the toilet, using a spanner to tighten the pipe joint. When he became aware of the looming presence, he looked up to see Andrew Ryan standing near him. "Didn't intend to startle you." Ryan flashed his teeth in the barest smile and went on. "Just curious how you're getting along." Bill was surprised at this familiarity from a man so above him, and by the change in tone. Ryan had been blaring angrily into the phone but minutes before. Now he seemed calm, his eyes glittering with curiosity. "Getting on with it, sir. Soon have it done." "Is that a brass fitting you're putting in there? I think the other two were using tin." "Well, I'll be sure they didn't, sir," said Bill, beginning not to care what impression he made. "Don't want to be bailing out your loo once a fortnight. Tin's not reliable like. If it's the price you're worried about, I'll pick up the cost of the brass, so not to worry, Squire." "And why would you do that?" "Well, Mr. Ryan, no man bails water out of privies built by Bill McDonough." Ryan looked at him with narrowed eyes, rubbing his chin. Bill shrugged and focused on the pipes, feeling strangely disconcerted. He could almost feel the heat from the intensity of Ryan's personality. He could smell his cologne, pricey and subtle. "There you are." Sure," Bill said, tightening with the wrench one last time for good luck. "Right as the mail. These pipes, anyhow." "Do you mean the job's done?" "I'll see how the lad's getting on, but I'd guess it's very nearly done, sir." He expected Ryan to wander back to his own work, but the tycoon remained, watching as Bill started the water flow, checked it for integrity, and cleaned up his tools and leftover materials. He took the receipt book from his pocket, scribbled out the cost. There'd be no time for an estimate, so he had a free hand. He wished he were the sort to pad the bill, since he gave a percentage to Chanowski and Ryan was rich, but he wasn't made that way. "Really?" Ryan said, looking at the bill, eyebrows raised. Bill just waited. Strange that Andrew Ryan, one of the richest, most powerful men in America, was personally involved in dealing with a plumber, scrutinizing a minor bill. But Ryan stood there, looking first at the bill, then at him. "This is quite reasonable," Ryan said at last. "You might have stretched your time, inflated the bill. People assume they can take advantage of wealthy men." Bill was mildly insulted. "I believe in being paid, sir, even being paid well, but only for the work I do." Again, that flicker of a smile, there and gone, the keen searching gaze. "I can see I've struck a nerve," Ryan said, "because you're a man like me, a man of pride and capability who knows what he is." A long, appraising look, then Ryan turned on his heel and strode out. Bill shrugged, gathered up the rest of his things, and returned to the mural room, expecting to see some Ryan underling awaiting him with a check. But it was Ryan, holding the check out to him. "Thank you, sir." Bill took it, tucked it into a pocket, nodded to the man. Was he mad, staring at him like that? And started hastily for the front door. He'd just got into the sitting room when Ryan called to him from the archway. "Mind if I ask you a question?" Bill paused, hoping it didn't turn out that Andrew Ryan was a poof. He'd had enough of upper-class poofs trying to pick him up. "It's the 40s, people." "Where do you think a man's rights should end?" Ryan asked. "His rights, sir?" A philosophical question, asked of a plumbing contractor. The old toff really was mad. McDonough humoured him. "Rights are rights. That's like asking which fingers a man should do without. I need all 10, me." "I like that. Now, just suppose you lose 1 or 2 fingers. What would you do?" "You'd think yourself unable to work, and you'd have a right to a handout, as it were, eh?" Bill hefted the toolbox as he considered. "No, I'd find something to do with 8 fingers, or 4. Make me own way. I'd like to be able to use my talents more, that's right enough, but I don't take handouts." "And what talents are those? Not that I discount a gift for plumbing, but is that what you mean?" "No, sir, not as much. I'm by way of being an engineer. In a simple way, mind. Could be I'll start my own building operation." He actually does stutter. Not so young any more, but still, I see things in me mind I'd like to build." He broke off, embarrassed at being so personal with this man. But there was something about Ryan that made you want to open up and talk. "You're British. Not one of the gentry types, certainly." "Right as rain, sir." Bill wondered if he'd get the brush off now. There was a touch of defensiveness when he added, "Grew up round Cheapside, like." Ryan chuckled dryly. "You're touchy about your origins. I know the feeling. I, too, am an immigrant. I was very young when I came here from Russia. I have learned to control my speech, reinvented myself. A man must make of his life a ladder that he never ceases to climb. If you're not rising, you are slipping down the rungs, my friend." "But by ascending," Ryan went on, shoving his hands in his jacket pockets and taking a pensive turn around the room, "one makes one's own class, do you see? Eh? One classes oneself." Bill had been about to make his excuses and walk out, but that stopped him. Ryan had articulated something he fiercely believed. "Couldn't agree more, sir," Bill blurted out. "That's why I've come to the USA. Anyone can rise up here, right to the top." Ryan grunted skeptically. "Yes and no. There are some who don't have the stuff, but it's not the class or the race or the creed that they were born into that decides it. It's something inside a man, and that's something you have. You're a true mugwump, a real individual. We'll talk again, you and I." Bill nodded goodbye, not believing for a second that they'd speak again. He figured a rich bloke took it into his mind to have a natter with the little people, patronizing a chap to prove to themselves how fairly and kindly they could be. He headed to check on Pablo and Roy before he made his way to the lobby and went about his business. This had been an interesting encounter. It'd be a story to tell in the pub, though no one would likely believe him. Andrew Ryan? Who else did you hobnob with? Howard Hughes? Your old pal William Randolph Hearst? But Bill McDonough's head was only moderately sore the next morning, and he answered the flat's clangorous telephone readily enough, hoping for work. A good sweat always cleared his head. "This Bill McDonough?" said a gruff, unfamiliar voice. "Right enough. My name's Sullivan, head of security for Andrew Ryan." "Security? What's he say I've done then? Look here, mate, I'm no crook." No, it's nothing like that. He just sent me to find you. Chinowski didn't want to give up the number. Claimed he lost it. Tried taking the job himself. I had to get from our friends at the phone company." "What job?" "Why, if you want it, Andrew Ryan's offering you a job of his new building engineer, starting immediately." Good golly, Miss Molly. That was rough. That was chapter 1. Chapter 2? I mean, I haven't gone for an hour yet, and I was like, gonna go for an hour, so, let's just clang that train, Mary Jane. The next chapter is longer. Quite a bit longer. Just looking at how long it is and seeing what my time is like. Oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was. Let's do it, y'all. Let's do it. Okay. Just gonna drink a little water. Oh, I lose my page. Just gonna drink a little water. All right. Chapter 2. The Docks, New York City, 1946. Sullivan sometimes wished he were back working the meatball beat in Little Italy. Ryan paid him well, sure, but having to dodge G-men on the docks was not his idea of good time. It was a bracing, misty evening, supposed to be spring, but didn't feel much like it. The waves were choppy, and the gulls were huddled on the pylons with their beaks under their wings. Their feathers ruffled in the cold northeast wind. 3 hulking great ships were tied up in the beat-up old dock, all freighters. This was not one of the fashionable wharfs, with passenger liners and pretty girls waving their hankies. Just a couple of red-faced, sour-looking salts in pea jackets tramping by, trailing cigarette smoke, boots crunching on old gold droppings. Sullivan walked up in the gangplank on the Olympian, the largest of the three ships in the fleet Ryan had bought for his secret North Atlantic project. He waved at the armed guard, Pinelli, huddled into the big coat on the top deck. Pinelli glanced down at him and nodded. Reuben Greavy, head engineer for the Wales brothers, was waiting on the lower deck at the top of the gangplank. Greavy was a fussy, pinch-mouthed, bespectacled little man in a rather showy cream-colored overcoat. Sullivan hesitated, glancing back down the dock, just making out the dark figure of the man who'd been following him. The guy in the slouch hat and trench coat was about 70 yards down the wharf, pretending to be interested in the ship's creaking in their moorings. Sullivan had hoped he'd dodged the son of a bitch earlier, but there he was, lighting a pipe for a bit of realistic spycraft. The pipe smoker had been tailing Sullivan since he'd gotten a cab at Grand Central, and maybe before. There wasn't much the guy could learn following him here. The ship was already loaded. The feds would never get an inspection warrant before it sailed at midnight. And what would they make of the prefabricated metal parts, giant pipes, and enormous pressure-resistant sheets of transparent synthetics? It was all stuff you could legitimately call export goods, only it wasn't being exported across the ocean, it was being exported to the bottom of the ocean. Sullivan shook his head, thinking about the whole North Atlantic project. It was a crazy idea, but when Ryan put his mind into something, it got done. And Sullivan owed the great man a lot, almost ruined him, getting kicked out of the NYPD. Shouldn't have refused to grease those palms. They'd set him up to look like a crook, fired him, and taken away his pension, left him with almost nothing. Sullivan took to gambling, and then his wife ran off with the last of his dough. He'd been thinking about eating a bullet when he crossed paths with the great man 2 years earlier. Sullivan reached into his coat pocket for the flask when remembered it was empty. Maybe he could get a drink from Greavy. Sullivan waved at Greavy and climbed the gangplank. They shook hands. Greavy's grip was soft, fingers puny in Sullivan's big grasp. Sullivan? Professor? Professor! This is Greavy's voice now! How many times? I'm not a professor. I have a doctorate in... Never mind. You know someone shadowing you on the dock back there. Different gun issue this time. Probably FBI or IRS. He turned his collar up. Kind of chilly out here. Come along, then. We'll have a drink. Sullivan nodded resignedly. He knew what Greavy's idea of a drink was. Watered brandy. Sullivan needed a double scotch. His father had sworn by Irish whiskey, but Sullivan was a Scotchman. Sure, the black betrayal of your heritage it is, his pa would say. The steady liquid diet of Irish whiskey had killed the old rascal at 50. Greavy led him along a companion way to his cabin, which was not much warmer. Most of the little oval room wasn't the narrow bed was taken up by a table covered with overlapping blueprints, sketches, graphs, intricate designs. The Wales brothers' design sometimes looked like Manhattan mated with London, but with the power of a cathedral. The designs were overly fancy for Sullivan's taste. Maybe he'd get to like it once it was done, if it ever was. Greavy took a bottle from under his pillow and poured them 2 slugs in glasses, and Sullivan eased the stuff down. We need to be ready for any kind of raid, Greavy said, distractedly looking past Sullivan at the blueprints, his mind already back in the world of the Wales design, and very nearly Ryan's new world. Sullivan shrugged. With any luck, he'll get the place finished before we can screw with us. The foundation's already laid, power's flowing right, most of the stuff's in place of the support ships, just a few more shipments. Greavy snorted, surprising Sullivan by pouring himself a second drink, and irritating Sullivan by not offering him one. You have no idea of the work. The risk, it's enormous. It's the very soul of innovation, and I need more men. We're already behind schedule. You'll get some more. Ryan's hired another man to supervise the foundational work, he calls it. Man named McDonough. He's going to put him in the North Atlantic project. Once he moves, he really can be trusted. I don't know how I'm talking. McDonough. Never heard of him. Don't tell me. He's not another apple picked from an orange tree." "A what?" "You know Ryan. He has his own notions of picking men. Sometimes they're remarkable, and, well, sometimes they're strange." He cleared his throat. Sullivan scowled. "Like me?" "No, no, no. Meaning yes, yes, yes. But it was true. Ryan had a way of recruiting black sheep, people who showed great potential but needed that extra chance. They all had a spirit of independence, were disillusioned with the status quo, and sometimes willing to skirt the law." "The problem," Sullivan said, "is that the government thinks Ryan is hiding something because he's trying to keep people from finding out where these shipments are going and what they're for. And he is hiding something, but not what they think." Greavy went to the blueprints, shuffling through them with one hand, his eyes gleaming behind his thick spectacles. "The strategic value of such construction is significant. In the world where we're likely to go toe-to-toe with the Soviets, and Mr. Ryan doesn't want any outsiders going down there to report on what he's building, he wants to run things his way, especially once it's set up, without interference. That's the whole point. Or, to be more accurate, he wants to set it up to run itself, to let the laissez-faire principle free. He figures if governments know about it, they'll infiltrate. And then there's the union types, communist organizers. Suppose they were to worm their way in. The best way to keep people like that out is to keep it completely secret from them. Another thing, Ryan doesn't want any outsiders to know about some of the new technology. You'd be amazed at what he's got. New inventions he could patent and make a fortune on, but he's holding it back for this project." "Where's he getting all these new inventions?" "Oh, he's been recruiting people for years. Who do you think designed those new dynamos of his?" "Well, it's his call," Sullivan said, looking wistfully into his empty glass. "Weak brandy or not, a drink was a drink. You've been working for him twice as long as I have. He don't tell me much. He likes information to be compartmentalized on this project. Keeps the secret better." Sullivan crossed to the porthole and peered out, saw his shadow out there, still clamping that pipe in his mouth. But now the G-man was pacing by the Olympian, looking the freighter up and down. "Son of a bitch still's out there. Doesn't seem empowered to do anything but ogle the ship. I've got to meet the Wales brothers. You know what they're like, artists. All too aware of their own genius." He frowned at the blueprints. Sullivan could see he was jealous of the Waleses. Greavy sniffed. "If there's nothing else, I'd better get on with it. Unless there's something else besides this new man that Ryan's taken on." "Who? Oh, McDonough? No, I'm here to confirm the time you ship out. Ryan wanted me to come down personally. He's beginning to think they might be listening in on the telephone somehow. I'm thinking if you can leave earlier than midnight, it'd be better. As soon as the captain's back. I expect him within the hour. Leave soon as you can. Maybe they'll get a warrant after all. I don't think they'd find anything illegal, but if Ryan wants to keep him from knowing what he's up to, the less they see the better." "Very well. But who could imagine what he's up to? Jules Verne? Certainly not these drones at the IRS. But Sullivan, I assure you, Ryan is correct. If they knew what he really has in mind, they'd be quite worried, particularly considering how little help he gave the Allies in the war. He took no sides at all. He didn't care for Hitler or the Japs neither." Were those the two sides? Still, he showed no special loyalty to the United States, and who can blame him? Look at the wreckage the Ant Society made of Europe, for the second time in the century, and the horror of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I can't wait to leave all that behind. Greavy escorted Sullivan towards the door. "Ryan has every intention of creating something that will grow and grow, first across the seabed, and then, in time, above the surface of the sea, when they've done such damage to themselves, these so-called nations of the earth, that they can no longer pose a threat. Until then, he is right to mistrust them, because he is creating something that will compete with them. A whole new society. Indeed, in time, a whole new world. One which will utterly replace the vile, squirming anthill humanity has become." Society's anthill. It's my anthill. Okay. All right. New York City, 1946. Merton, get out of my bar. Merton was gaping at Frank Gorland from behind the beer-stained desk at the Clangers' smoky little office. Harve Merton was a man with a large round head and thick lips, a skinny body, and a brown turtleneck sweater. Hell, he looked like a damn turtle, but a turtle in a bowler hat. What the hell you mean, your bar? He asked, tamping a cigarette out. Sorry, let me mute that. People be blowing me up because they stupid. Okay. Tamping a cigarette out in a butt-filled ashtray. I'm the owner, ain't I? As of tonight, anyhow. What the hell you mean you're the owner, Gorland? The man who called himself Frank Gorland smiled without humor and leaned against the frame of the closed door. You know any expressions besides what the hell? You're about to sign this bar over to me, is what the hell. Gorland ran a hand over his bald head. Prickly, needed to shave it. He took the papers from his coat, all legal down to the last period, and dropped them on Merton's desk. That look familiar? You signed it. Merton stared at the papers, eyes widening. That was you? Hudson Loans? Nobody told me that was a loan is a loan. What I seem to recall is you were drunk when you signed it. Needed some money to pay off your gambling vig. A big fucking vig it was too, Merton. You were there that night? I don't remember. You remember getting the money, don't you? It don't count if I was drunk. Merton, if there was no business done drunk in this town, half its business wouldn't get done. I think you put something in my drink. That's what I think. The next day I felt, stop whining. You cashed the check, didn't you? You got the loan, couldn't pay the interest. Time's up. Now this place is mine. It's all there in black and white. This dump was your collateral. Look, Mr. Gorland, Merton licked his thick lips. Don't think I disrespect you. I know you've hustled, worked your way to a good thing, this end of town, but you can't just take a man's business. No, my attorneys can. They come after your hammer and tongs, pal, he grinned. Hammer, tongs, and Klein, attorneys at law. Merton screamed. Merton seemed to shrivel in his seat. Okay, what do you want from me? Not what I want, what I'm taking. I told you. I want the bar. I own a bookkeeping operation. I own a drugstore, but I don't have a bar. And I like the clanger. Lots of dirt on the fights. What with the boxing setup and all, might be useful. Now you call that fat-ass bartender of yours in here. Tell him he's got a new boss. Gorland, Barris, Winston, Moskowitz, Wang. Just some of the names he'd had the last few years. His own name, quite another, Frank, seemed like it belonged to somebody else. Keep him guessing. That was his way. The clanger wasn't just a cash cow. It was a place for Frank Gorland to hear the right conversations. It was just a short walk from the docks, but it was not just a nautical bar. There was a big boxing bell on the wall behind the bar. When they tapped the new keg, the bell was loudly clanged, and the beer lovers came running, sometimes from down the street. Best German-style brew in New York City. The walls of the dusty cave-like bar were decorated with worn-out boxing gloves, frayed ropes from rings, black and white photos of old-time boxers going back to St. John L. Sullivan. He had a bartender, an old Irish lush named Mulrooney, working down at the other end. But Gorland liked to work the bar so he could hear the talk. Good for his bookmaking action, and you never know how it might fix the next grift. When you serve a beer, cock an ear. The talk at the crowded bar tonight was full of how Joe Louis, the brown bomber, back from the war with a pocketful of nothing and a big tax debt, was going to defend his world heavyweight title against Billy Conn. And how the tired Jack Johnson, first Negro to win the heavyweight champ title, had died 2 days before in a car accident, none of which was what Gorland needed to know. But there were a couple of guys here who'd have the skinny on the up-and-comer Neil Steele versus the fading boxing circuit bum Charlie wriggles. Gorland had heard a rumor that Steele might be throwing the fight, and he had a theory about how that information might pay off, way past the usual payoff. Only Gorland needed more assurance that Steele was taking the fall. Gorland hated bartending because it was actual physical work. A great grifter should never have to do real work. But he wiped down the bar, made small talk, he served a beer, and cocked an ear. The jukebox was finishing a rollicking Duke Ellington number, and in the brief interval before it switched over to an Ernie Bubbles Whitman Big Bang cut, Gorland zeroed in on the conversation of the two wise guys in the white ties and pinstripes whispering over their sambucas. He wiped at an imaginary spill on the bar, edging closer. "But can we count on Steele?" said the one some called Twitchy. He twitched his pencil-thin mustache. "Thinks he's going to challenge the bomber next year." "So let him challenge. He can lose one fight. He needs the payoff, needs it big," said the chunkier one of the two. "Snort Bianchi," with a snort. Bianchi scowled, seeing the bartender hanging around too nearby. "Hey, bartender, there's a broad over there trying to get a drink. How's about you fuck off and serve her?" "I'm the owner here, gents," Gorland said, smiling. "You want to come back in here? Show some respect for the establishment." Wasn't good to let these greasers get the upper hand. Bianchi frowned but only shrugged. Gorland leaned closer to the wise guys, adding in a murmur, "Psst, maybe you better take a powder if these feds are looking for you." He nodded towards the door, where an FBI flatfoot by the name of Voss stood in the gray snap brim and overcoat. Glaring about with his piggish little eyes, he looked about as undercover as the Statue of Liberty. The wise guys slipped out the back way as the federal agent made his way to the bar. He was reaching into his coat when Gorland said, "Don't bother with the badge, Voss. I remember you." He didn't want badges flashed anywhere near him if he could avoid it. Voss shrugged and dropped his hand. He leaned across the bar so he could be heard over the noise. "Word on the street is, this here's your joint now." "That's right," Gorland said evenly. "Lock, stock, and leaky barrels." "What you calling yourself now? Gorland still?" "My name's Frank Gorland. You know that." "That's not the name you had when we tried to connect you to that interstate bookmaking operation." "You want to see my birth certificate?" "Our man's already seen it. Says maybe it was forged." "Yeah, but he's not sure. Not much of an expert if he doesn't know for sure." Voss snorted. "You got that right. You going to offer me a drink or not?" Gorland shrugged, decided not to make a smart remark about drinking on duty. "Bourbon?" "Good guessin'." Gorland pointed the G-man a double. "You didn't come in here to catch drinks." "You got that right, too." He took down a slug, grimaced appreciatively, and went on. "I figure you're gonna hear stuff in a place like this. You give me something now and then, we might lay off finding out who the hell you really are." Gorland chuckled, but he felt a chill. He didn't want his past poked into. "If I tip you, it'll be because I'm a good citizen. No other reason. Anything special going on?" Voss crooked a finger, leaned even farther across the bar. Gorland hesitated. Then he leaned close. Voss spoke right in his ear. "You hear anything about some kind of big secret project happening down at the docks? Maybe bankrolled by Andrew Ryan? North Atlantic project? Millions of bucks flowing out to sea?" "Nah," Gorland said. He hadn't heard about it, but the millions of bucks in the name Andrew Ryan got his attention. "I hear anything, Voss, I'll let you know. But what kind of deal is he up to?" "That's something you don't need to know." Gorland straightened up. "You're killing my back here with this. Listen, I gotta make it look like, he'd been seen talking to the Fed a little too chummily." Voss nodded just slightly. He understood. "Listen, Flatfoot," Gorland shouted as the jukebox changed records. "You won't find out anything from me. Now charge me with something or buzz out of my place." Some of the customers laughed. Some grinned and nodded. Voss shrugged. "You better watch your step, Gorland." He turned and walked out, playing his part. Only he was going to find out one of these days that Frank Gorland wasn't going to play along with anything the feds wanted. He'd feed them some hooey and find out for himself what Andrew Ryan was up to. That kind of money must be some way to tap into it, especially as this Frank Gorland's territory he was owed. He didn't hear anything about Andrew Ryan for a couple of days, but one day he heard a drunk blonde chippy muttering about Mr. Fat Cat Ryan, goddamn him, as she frantically waved her empty glass at him. Hey, where's my drinky? Demanded the blonde. What you have, darling? Well, I have, he says, the frowsy blonde slurred, flipping a big mussed curl out of her eyes. Her eye shadow had run from crying. She was a snub-nosed little thing, but might be worth a roll in the hay. Only last time he'd banged a drunk, she'd thrown up all over him. I'll have a scotch if I can't have my man back, she sobbed. That's what I'll have. Dead, 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 and no one from that Ryan crew is saying why. Gorland tried out of his best look of sympathy. Lost your man, did ya? That'll get you a big one on the house, sweet cakes. He poured her a double scotch. Hey, spritz some goddamn soda in there. What do you think, I'm a lush because I take a free drink? Soda it is, darling. Here you go. He waited as she drank down half of it in one gulp. The sequins were coming off the shoulder straps of her second-hand silver blue gown, and one of her bosoms was in danger of flopping out of the décolletage. He said he could see a little tissue sticking up. I just want my Irving back, she said, her head sagging down over the drink. Lucky the song coming on the juke was a Dorsey and Sinatra crooner, soft enough he could make her out. Just want him back. He absent-mindedly poured a couple more drinks for the sailors at her side, their white caps cocked rakishly as they argued over bar dice and tossed money at him. What became of the unfortunate soul? Gorland asked, pocketing the money and wiping the bar. Lost at sea, was he? She gawped at him. How'd you know that? You a mind reader? Gorland winked. A little fishy told me. She put a finger to one side of her nose and gave him an elaborate wink back. So you heard about Ryan's little fun show. My Irving shipped out with hardly a goodbye. Said he had to do some kind of diving for them Ryan people. That was where he got his lettuce, see? What they call deep diving. Learned it in the Navy salvage. They said it to be pennies from heaven. Just a month at sea doing some kind of underwater building. Underwater building? You mean like pylons for a dock? I don't know. But I tell you, he came back the first time real spooked. Wouldn't talk about it. Said it was much his life was worth to talk, see? But he told me one thing. She wagged a finger at him and closed one eye. Them ships down on Dock 17, they're hiding something from the feds. He was plenty scared about it. What if he was in something criminal, not even knowing, and he took the fall? And then I get a telegram, a little piece of paper saying he ain't coming back. Accident on the job, burial at sea. Her head wobbled on her neck. Her voice was interrupted by hiccuping. And that's the end of my Irving. I'm supposed to just swallow that? Well, I went over to the place that hired him, Seaworthy Construction, they call it, and they threw me out, treated me like I was some kind of tramp. All I wanted was what was coming to me. I came out of South Jersey, and let me tell you, we get what we're owed, because she went on in that vein for a while, losing the Ryan thread. Then a zoot suitor put a bebop number on the juke and started whooping it up. The noise drowned her out, and pretty soon she was cradling her head on the bar, snoring. Gorland had one of those intuitions that this was the door to something big. His lush bartender came weaving in, and Gorland turned the place over, tossing over his apron, vowing inwardly to fire the bastard first chance. He had a grift to set up. First thing Gorland noticed, coming into the sweat-reeking prep room for the fight, was that hangdog look on Steele's face. Good. Sitting in the rub-down table, getting his gloves laced on by a black trainer, the scarred, barrel-chested boxer looked like his best friend had died, and his old lady too. Gorland tucked a $5 into the Negro's hand and tilted his head towards the door. "I'll tie his gloves on for him, bud." The guy took the hint and beat it. Steele was looking Gorland up and down, his expression hinting he'd like to practice his punching right here. Only he didn't know this was Frank Gorland, what with his disguise. Right now, the man the East Side knew as Frank Gorland was going by, "My name's Lucio Fabrici," Gorland said, trying Steele's gloves nice and tight. "Bianchi sent me." I'm still doing his accent, though. "Bianchi? What for? I told him not an hour ago it was a done deal." Steele showed no sign of doubting that he was talking to Lucio Fabrici, a mobster working with Bianchi. Fabrici had gone to great lengths for his disguise. The pinstripe suit, the toothpick stuck in the corner of his mouth, the spats, the toupee, the thin mustache. A high-quality theatrical mustache carefully stuck on with spirit gum. But mostly it was his voice. Just the right Little Italy intonation and that carefully tuned facial expression that said, "We're pals, you and I, unless I have to kill you." Well, let me try and be more Italy when I am him now. Not hard for him to pull off the character, or almost any character. Running off from the orphanage, he'd taken a job as a stage boy in the vaudeville theater. Stuck it out for 3 years, though they paid him in pennies and sausages. He'd slept on a pile of ropes backstage, but it had been worth it. He'd watched the actors, the comics, even the famous Shakespearean type who played half a dozen parts in his one-man show. Young Frank had sucked it all up like a sponge. Makeup, costumes, the works. But what most impressed him was the fact that the people in the audience believed. For a few minutes they believed the laudanum-addicted Welsh actor was Hamlet. That kind of power impressed young Frank. He'd set himself to learn it. Judging from Steele's reaction, he'd learned it good. "Look here, Fabrici, if Bianchi's gonna Welsh on my cut, I won't take it. This is hard enough for me." "You ever heard of a triple cross, kid?" "I don't." "Bianchi's changed his mind." Gorland lowered his voice, glanced to make sure the door was locked. "Bianchi doesn't want you to throw the fight. We've let it out you're throwing the fight, so we can bet the other way, see? You'll get your cut off the proceeds, and double." Steele's mouth hung open. He jumped to his feet, clapped his gloved hands together. "You mean it? Say, that's swell. I'll knock that lug's socks off." Something was pounding on the door. The audience was chanting Steele's name. "You do that, Steele." "I hear him calling you. Get out there and nail him early." "I don't." "First chance. Make it a knockout in the first round." Steele was delighted. "Tell Bianchi I'll deliver. And how. A KO first round. Ha!" Half an hour later, Gorland was at his bookie operation in the basement of the drugstore. Gorland and Garcia, his chief bookie, were in the room behind the betting counters, talking quietly, as Maury took bets at the window. 2 or 3 freight ship deckhands, judging by their watch caps and tattoos, stood in line to place their bets, passing a flask and yammering. "I don't know, boss," Garcia said, scratching his head. Garcia was a chubby second-generation Cuban with a cheap 3-piece suit, chomping a cigar that had never been anywhere near Cuba. "I get how knowing about Steele throwing the fight'll get us paid off if we place our own bets through our guys," Garcia was saying. "But, boss, I don't see how you're going to get that kind of money out if you're talking about—" "'Cause he isn't gonna throw the fight. All the smart mob money'll be on him losing, and we'll be on the bet of him winning, and we'll take him big time when he surprises 'em." Garcia blinked. "They'll take it out of Steele's hide, boss." "And how's that my worry? Just you make sure the mob's up to their neck betting against Steele. They're going to be sad little monkeys when they lose, but they won't trace it to us. If you see Harley, tell him to keep an eye on the poker game at the hotel. Got some real big money on suckers coming in." He walked over to Maury to have a gander at the take and heard a couple of dock workers talking over their flask. "Sure, Ryan's hiring big down there. It's a hot ticket, pal. Big paydays. The problem is, real QT stuff. Can't talk about the job. And it's dangerous, too. Somewhere out in the North Atlantic, Iceland way." Gorland's ears pricked up at that. He slipped outside by the side door and set himself to wait. Less than a minute later, a couple of the deckhands came out, weather-beaten guys in a watch cap and pea jackets, headed for the docks. The deck rats didn't notice him following. They were too busy whistling at the group of girls having a smoke across the street. He shadowed the sailors close to dockside, then hung back in the shadows of a doorway, sussing the scene out. The deckhands went aboard one of the ships, but it was another one that caught Gorland's eye. A new freighter with a lot of activity on its decks, getting ready to cast loose. The name on the bow was the Olympian. That was one of Ryan's ships. There was a guy in the lee of the stack of crates near the loading dock smoking a pipe. Something about him said G-Man. It wasn't Voss, probably one of his men, if Gorland was any judge of cop flesh. If Andrew Ryan was attracting G-men, he must be up to something of questionable legal status, which meant, at the very least, he could be blackmailed. If Gorland could find out exactly what to blackmail him for. Seemed like the agent was watching the two guys arguing at the gangplank of Ryan's freighter, but he wasn't close enough to listen without them noticing. Gorland tilted his hat so the G-man wouldn't see his face and strolled over, hands in his pockets, weaving a bit, making like he was drunk. "Maybe I can get some more work on one of these ships," Gorland said, slurring his words. Maybe back-busting work they got, don't care for it. Maybe they need a social director." He did a good drunk, and all three men discounted him immediately as he approached. Gorland paused near the gangplank, muttering to himself as he pretended to struggle with lighting a cigarette. All the while he listened to the argument between the man standing on the roped gangplank and the mustachioed man on the dock, who looked like he might be a deckhand. "I just ain't shipping out to that place again, and that's all there is to it," snarled the deckhand in a black pea coat. He wore a knit cap on his head and a handlebar mustache on his upper lip. A swarthy type, eyebrows merged in a single black bar. But getting old, maybe, skin leathery, hair salt and pepper, hand trembling as he jabbed a finger at the ship's officer. "You ain't gonna make me go out there. Too goddamn risky." "Why, percentage-wise, they're losing less people than building the Brooklyn Bridge," said the officer. "I have Mr. Greavy's word on that. Stop being such a coward." "I don't mind being on the ship, but in that hell down below, not me. There's no use trying to say you'll only take the job if you stay on the ship. It's what Creevy says that goes. If he says you go down, you go down. Then you go down in my place, and you wrestle with the devil. It's unholy. What's he trying to do down there? If you leave here now, matey, you don't get paid a penny more. Get aboard this instant. We sail in 10 minutes, or you can say goodbye to your contract. 2 weeks' salary for my life. Puh! You won't die down there. We had one run of bad luck is all. I say it again. Puh! Goodbye to you, Mr. Forrester." The deckhand stalked off, and Gorland realized the ship's officer was glaring at him with unconcealed suspicion. "You! What are you doing hanging around here?" Gorland flicked his cigarette butt into the sea. He grinned drunkenly. "Just having a smoke, matey." He set off to follow the deckhand, wondering what he'd stumbled onto. It was like a trail of coins gleaming on a moonlit path. If he kept following the shiny little clues, he'd find the money bag they were leaking from. Gorland knew this trail could lead him to trouble, maybe jail, but he was a restless man, unhappy if he wasn't out on an edge. He either stayed busy working the game or lost himself in a woman's arms. Otherwise, he started thinking too much, like about how his old man dumping him in that orphanage when he was a boy. The deckhand turned the corner of one of the loading docks to go up to the access road. It was a foggy night, and there was no one else on the short side road of the avenue. No one to see. Frank Gorland had two approaches to getting what he wanted from life: long-term planning and creative improvisation. He saw a possibility: a foot-long piece of 1-inch diameter metal pipe fallen off some truck. It was just lying in the gutter, calling to him. He scooped up the piece of pipe and hurried to catch up to the slouching shape of the deckhand. He stepped up behind the man, grabbed his collar, jerked him slightly off balance without knocking him over. "Hey!" the man yelped. Gorland held the deckhand firmly in place and pressed the end of the cold metal pipe to the back of his neck. "Freeze!" Gorland growled, altering his voice. He put steel and officiousness into it. "You turn around, mister. You try to run, and I'll pull the trigger and separate your backbones with a bullet." The man froze. Don't Don't shoot. What do you want? I don't have but $1 on me. You think I'm some crooked dock rat? I'm a federal agent. Now don't even twitch. Garland let go of the deckhand's collar, reached into his own coat pocket, took out his wallet, flipped it open, flashed the worthless special officer badge he used when he needed bogus authority. He flicked it in front of the guy's face, not letting him have a real look at it. You see that? Garland demanded. Yes, sir. He put the wallet away and went on. Now hear this, sailor. You're in deep shit for working on that crooked project of Ryan's. They told me it was legal, all legal. They told you it was a secret, too, right? You think it's legal to keep secrets from Uncle Sam? No, I guess not. I mean, well, I don't know nothing about it. Just that they're building something out there, and it's a dangerous job down them tunnels under the sea. Tunnels? Under the sea? What for? For the construction, the foundations. I don't know why he's doing it. None of the men do. He tells them only what they need to know. Only I heard Greavy talking to one of them scientist types. All I can tell you is what I heard. And that was that Ryan is building a city under the sea down there. A what? Like a colony under the goddamn ocean. And they're laying out all kind of stuff down there. It don't seem possible, but he's doing it. I heard he's spending hundreds of millions. Might be getting into billions. He's spending more money than any man ever spent building anything. Garland's mouth went dry as he contemplated it, and his heart thumped. Where is this thing? Out in the North Atlantic. They keep us below decks when we go, so we don't see exactly where. I ain't even sure. Cold as death out there it is. But he's got the devil's own heat coming up. Steam comes up some ways, and sulfur fumes, and the like. Some took sick from them fumes. Men have died down there building that thing. How do you know how much he's spending? I was carrying bags into Mr. Greavy's office on the platform ship, and I was curious like. I hears him talking. The what kind of ship? That's what they call it. Platform ship. A platform to launch their slinkers. The Olympian there, it supplies the platform ships. Slinkers. That what you said? Bathyspheres they is. It's fucking Dobby. Bathyspheres? If you're lying to me. No, officer, I swear it. Then get out of here. Run. And tell no one you spoke to me, or you go right to jail. The man went scurrying away, and Garland was left in a state of mute amazement. Ryan is building a city under the sea. I got all southern there at the end. I don't even know how that happened and how to get out of it. So that was chapter 2. We made it to chapter 3 of Rapture. And I'm going to call it here today. I had a lot of fun. Love this thing. I'm working on my accents. They're going to get better. I'm going to be like rocking it by the end of the book. You can look here. So thanks for tuning in. Catch me next time. Hopefully it'll be within a week. I will be posting on my Twitter when I'm going to be reading again. So you can follow me there at Tim Panic Pulse. You can also follow me on Instagram at Tim Panic Pulse if you just need something happy on your feed. And stay safe out there. Stay proud. Stay loud. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.